Welcome back. You're watching Centre Stage. It is Prime Minister Narendra Modi's biggest diplomatic test. The arrival of the Chinese President in Ahmedabad today presented Modi with a challenge he has to take head-on. Interestingly, it was Sabarmati diplomacy that Modi chose to overwhelm his guest with, an extravaganza of the sort Ahmedabad has never seen before.
If one shot could define President Xi's Sabarmati visit, this is it. Leaders of two not-so-friendly nations enjoying a candid moment. But the visit to Sabarmati Ashram and the Sabarmati riverfront on day one of Xi's visit were replete with such photo ops with Modi. It was Narendra Modi on a diplomatic overdrive, intent on displaying the cultural powerhouse that India is. Playing the perfect host, Modi welcomed President Xi shortly after the two had separated after signing 3 MOUs. With the day's business done, Modi unleashed a cultural extravaganza on the Chinese president and his wife. In visuals reminiscent of Modi's Japan trip earlier this month, a time when Japanese Premier Shinzo Abe took Modi around a temple, it was Modi who personally escorted Xi for more than 2 hours. The visit to Gandhi Ashram had President Xi paying respects to the Mahatma, trying out the charkha, being given gifts by Modi. The second cultural fiesta was across the specially cleaned Sabarmati River. At a riverfront specially spruced up for the Chinese dignitaries. The Chinese couple were treated to a plethora of Gujarati cultural shows, with several bonding moments for Modi and Xi. They sat on swings. They had their talks on the banks of the river. They enjoyed cultural shows together. The cultural extravaganza climaxed with Modi and his state guest entering the super luxury tent for dinner. The menu reportedly had more than 150 vegetarian dishes, just an appetizer for the main course in Delhi on Thursday. With Gaurav Sawant in Ahmedabad, Bureau Report, Headlines Today.
While Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping enjoyed a rendezvous along the Sabarmati riverfront, Indian and Chinese officials held a flag meeting in Chushul to discuss the incursions along the line of actual control. After the cultural extravaganza in Ahmedabad, the tension shifts to Delhi tomorrow. The big question is, will India talk tough with China?
Behind the bonhomie, there is tension. Just days before Chinese President Xi Jinping's arrival, China provoked with incursions along the line of actual control. In Ladakh's Demchok, the Chinese have objected to India's attempt to harness water resources. And in Chumar, China wants India to vacate a position overlooking a new road that it has built. These border skirmishes that will take center stage on Thursday when Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping meet in Delhi. But the question is, can India be aggressive with China?
चाइना ने अपनी इंटेंशंस क्लियर कर दी हैं मैप के ज़रिए और अपनी प्रेजेंस के ज़रिए, जो अभी हाल में चुमार और देमचुक में उन्होंने काफ़ी मात्रा में की है। तो चाइना कितना भारत की बात मानेगा और चाइना कितना दोस्ती का हाथ बढ़ाएगा और कहाँ तक बढ़ाएगा, ये कहना मुश्किल है।
There have been over 300 transgressions on the LAC by the Chinese just this year. and the highest number of incursions have been in Chumar, beginning from Daulat Beg Oldie sector in eastern Ladakh in April last year. In June too, China tried to intrude through the Pangong Lake. Demchok in Ladakh became a new target in June this year, followed by Butse. And Demchok once again the latest point of intrusion by the Chinese army on September 11th.
Amras Shrikhand after Mattha Dhokla Khandvi was India's effort to put in some sweetness in the Sino-Indian relations. But the contentious border dispute, the long border from Arunachal Pradesh to Ladakh and repeated Chinese incursions are a major bone of contention between India and China. India is expected to strongly take up this issue, not just for a tactical solution to the present incursion in Demchok, but for a permanent solution of the boundary dispute if 21st century has to be Asia's century. With cameraman Alok Bhatnagar, Gaurav Sawant in Ahmedabad for Headlines Today.
Gaurav Sawant is joining us from the Sabarmati riverfront tonight. He's been reporting extensively on this big meeting. Also, Bharat Karnad, leading expert on Indo-China talks, also joining us on this broadcast. Gaurav, to you first, give our viewers a live sense of what's happening in Ahmedabad at this time. Some of what we're seeing is quite unprecedented in recent Indian history, where you've got leaders walking along the Sabarmati riverfront. Manmohan Singh didn't do it for 10 years at least. So these things haven't happened, and therefore they're coming as something very fresh for people watching this on television. You've got two heads of state casually walking along, sitting on a swing. What did you pick up while you were observing the atmospherics, Gaurav?
This was diplomacy Narendra Modi style, completely different from what this country has seen in the past. This was Narendra Modi engaging with China, not in that extremely formal, suited up version, but an informal conversation. Prime Minister Narendra Modi presented a khadi jacket to the Chinese president, which he immediately wore. Then they walked down the Sabarmati riverfront. They sat on swings. It was all atmospherics. It was soaking in each other's company. It was getting to know each other before they have some real hard-nosed bargaining, whether it's economy or strategy or the disputed Sino-Indian border talks tomorrow. So it's getting to know each other first, sweetening that relationship with a good meal, and then the intense issues will be taken up. Now, my sources in the Ministry of External Affairs tell me that this issue, the disputed border issue, will be on the table, and not for some tactical solution, but for a strategic, permanent solution. It's not happening overnight. It may take decades, but at least whatever the mechanism has been so far, whether it's BDCA, the Border Cooperation Agreement, Border Defense Cooperation Agreement, or tactical level meetings, improve upon it.
Bharat Karnad, do you really expect Prime Minister Modi to take up the tough issue of the border dispute, or will this be about sharing Gujarati thali, sitting on a swing, walking along casually, thinking of ways to increase trade, but ignoring the real tough, prickly issues?
Well, look, I don't think we need to discount the very fresh optics that we're talking about, and the fact that there's obvious warmth between Modi and Xi Jinping. And that's evident in the way they have been informally going around, with each other on the Sabarmati riverfront and so on. I don't think, though, that either of these very seasoned politicians mistake the optics for the hard issues that divide India and China. What one can expect tomorrow is, and I think they sort of explored these issues that they'll be discussing in detail in the plenary tomorrow, but I think they have, generally I think outlined their differences. Now the question is, will the officials tomorrow, when they get together, be able to create some kind of a bridging mechanism or some kind of language to suggest that there's some movement forward? I doubt it, because I think if were they to do it, it'll be a very synthetic exercise. It'll become far too obvious. When we talk about a permanent solution for the border dispute, this is something India has been hankering for years. But this is exactly what the Chinese are loath to even accept as a premise for negotiations. They say, let's just negotiate, and that's all we have been doing for the last nearly 40 years. with very little to show for
The
it.
Chinese are saying they want to
well,
invest
yes.
$100 billion in the India story over the next couple of years. If that were to happen, would that increase the economic stakes that Beijing has in the India story, thereby ensuring that they don't want to destabilize things along the border, because that would then impact their business interests as well? That's the manner in which Japan and China have proceeded. That's also how the United States and China have been able to stay engaged despite all their differences. Is that the best approach for Prime Minister Modi to follow, or do you think he should be forceful in the manner that he was, say, with Pakistan?
No, look, I think we shouldn't mix up the two. There are issues of trade and commerce and various other subjects where India's and China's interests do in fact intersect. Trade and investments being one of them. I mean, India is open to investment, and I think Modi will do everything possible to facilitate the Chinese investments in infrastructure and setting up of industrial parks and so on. But that's very different from the hard issues that still need resolution. And you shouldn't really expect that one will affect the other. In fact, you can carry on parallelly, where you can have very good relations on the economic front, while at the same time disagreeing absolutely on the hard security issues. So I don't see the need for Mr. Modi to moderate the message that he wants to convey. In fact, he'll make a very good impression on the Chinese if he were to state very plainly and very, I think, forcefully Indian interests in resolving the border dispute. But also, should that not be possible in the foreseeable future or even in the remote future, for carrying on with relations in the other areas.
I must tell our viewers that we've got live images coming in from the Palam technical area. You see them on your screen right now. This is the Chinese president's plane touching down in New Delhi. Make no mistake, of all the bilateral meetings that Prime Minister Modi is doing this month, and he's done many, he went to Japan, he'll be going to the United States where he'll meet President Obama and several other top international leaders. But the meeting between the heads of state of New Delhi and Beijing is by far the most crucial. I want to bring in also now Alka Acharya, Professor of Chinese Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Mr. Acharya, we're seeing the Chinese president step down, but there is a popular sense in India amongst many people that while we are willing to invite investment from China, Prime Minister Modi must take up the tough issues of border resolution. This can't just be about trade, it can't be about Gujarati thalis. The real issues need to be discussed. Do you believe it is possible to focus just on trade and investment and leave aside the more prickly issues, ma'am?
I find it interesting, Rahul, that you should say that focus on the real issues, almost as if economic ties, trade, infrastructure development, modernization development are not real issues. I think in the current context, the priority that has to be accorded to building a strong industrial base, which is going to help us improve our manufacturing capabilities and thereby our export capacities, help us get
even
an
as
edge.
we speak and you say what you do, there is a live incursion in the Demchok sector. There was a flag meeting which proved inconclusive. They've agreed to meet again. Now surely this is not happening without people in the Chinese establishment knowing that they've gone across on the other side and intruded quite deeply into the Indian side of the line of actual control. How can you say that trade and investment is important and we should not focus about the border dispute, which is alive at this time, ma'am?
I did not say that. I just said that at this point, economy, trade, investment, development are as real issues as the border problem, the boundary dispute, which has been on the table, which has been seen as something that both sides are committed to resolve by dialogue and peaceful means. It's not something that we are brushing under the carpet. It's a problem, yes, and the problem is that we don't seem to be seeing a resolution fast enough to our liking. But the fact is that it has far more efforts far more efforts and far more imagination has gone into managing the border dispute. In fact, I would say that now the time has come to actually focus on some of these very critical questions facing India Otherwise, it is not like, I mean, we can keep talking about the border and the world is moving along. The world economy is moving at a very rapid pace, and I don't think your window of opportunity goes beyond 2020 or 2025, 2030. Till then, you have to get your entire manufacturing process, your skill development, your export capabilities, your
now,
industry.
one second, there's also an element of hypocrisy involved over here.
No,
one second, Bharat Karnad, I have here comments from candidate Modi where Manmohan Singh was saying exactly the same thing, and time after time candidate Modi was targeting the then Prime Minister, saying you cannot be talking about investment when these attacks are taking place. The government has been completely ineffective in its approach to China. We must first resolve the border dispute. It's the same gentleman. Surely he needs to be held accountable to the same standards that he asked of others, Mr. Karnad.
Well, I think there is a difference between being a Prime Minister and a candidate for the Prime Ministership. But that said, I think the fact is that you can continue quite well and effectively by moving parallelly on both tracks, meaning that you can not go very far on the dispute resolution front, but you can have very good relations and go forward in the economic sphere. So I don't think these two are mutually exclusive, because the Chinese don't think so, and we should also begin to believe that this is possible. And I think, but the difference between the Modi and I imagine the attitude taken by Manmohan Singh regime in the past is going to be that the Modi government is going to be far more forthright in expressing the differences in putting down stakes. Now let's see if that actually bears out with what transpires tomorrow and the kind of agreements that are signed. But again, India and China have to live together, but there are these hard differences that divide them. And unless these things are acknowledged, you are going to have problems in the future. If you assume that there is really no problem to worth needing your attention.
That's not the sense that I get at all, because, for example, on the issue of the Hurriyat leaders being met by the High Commissioner, we saw Prime Minister Modi take a tough stand, saying, if you go ahead and meet Hurriyat leaders, I will not allow my Foreign Secretary to go out and meet yours. Tomorrow, if there is some sort of a provocation in Arunachal Pradesh, will Prime Minister Modi, Bharat Karnad, in your view, do the same thing? You're talking about stakes, or will he say, ignore this minor botheration, let's just focus on trade and investment, we have to get the high-speed trains going first?
Well, the point I think is that one of the reasons that has been alluded to the reportage of more of these incursions and military incidents on the LAC is that the Indian Army is taking a more aggressive stand in dealing with the intruding PLA units and stuff. So that has happened. Now the point is the difference between dealing with Pakistan and Nawaz Sharif and dealing with China and Xi Jinping is that Modi is personally has good relations with Xi Jinping. So there is that difference, of course. Because anytime you know a person in a personal sort of way, you're going to react to him and behave with him differently than with a person who's a more formal sort of a person you have met once in Delhi during your investiture. So there is that difference. But that said, I think the policy on the ground will be to meet the Chinese in a tit-for-tat fashion, to deal with the Chinese aggressiveness in a very straightforward way.
No, but what, Gaurav, is the proof that we've seen of any aggression from India so far? There seems to be a level of personal chemistry between Prime Minister Modi and the Chinese leaders, and he wants to use that to try and increase Chinese stakes in the Indian economy. But people would wonder what happened to all his comments earlier when Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was trying to do exactly the same thing.
Well, that's true.
Rahul, from
there
what
is
my
that
sources
anomaly
in the
there,
government
and I
tell
think
me is that Prime Minister Narendra Modi will very emphatically take up this matter tomorrow with China. He will tell them that 21st century has to be Asia's century. The era of West is long gone. If China and India together have to solve the problems of the world, if the world has to look to India and China for a solution, India and China themselves cannot be a problem and cannot have problems with each other. So that needs to be resolved, whether it's done at the level of the special representatives, whether it's Ajit Doval dealing with the Chinese on this issue, or whether there'll be another mechanism remains to be seen. But the difference, as Bharat Karnad rightly pointed out, was now every time there's an incursion from the Chinese side, Indian troops also go all the way up to the Indian claim line and stay as long. There is a difference. If India has complained of 350 odd incursions from the Chinese side, the Chinese, from what my sources tell me, have complained of over 400 incursions from the Indian side. So this is what the Chinese claim are incursions, and India says we are only maintaining our claim line.
Alka
So there
Acharya,
is
do you see a
tit for tat
difference
which
in
is
the
already
Manmohan
happening
Singh
on
approach
ground.
to China and the Modi approach to China, or do you think that both are essentially trying to do exactly the same thing?
Well, the question would be approach to what? There is this great expectation that this visit is going to break new ground and that somehow we have reached a turning point, there's going to be a paradigm shift. I doubt that we are going to see anything of the sort. What we are seeing is a new beginning in terms of the first meeting one-on-one between the two leaders on Indian soil, and therefore the establishment or the foundations being set for a relationship that is going to take the overall India-China relationship forward for the next 5 years, if not 10. Now, this is therefore very important in the sense that it will help in negotiating the tough problems, the contentious issues. If there is a personal equation, it can somewhat make matters easier in raising the problems, and I think that therefore, to that extent, that is the framework within which this meeting should be taken, and not seen as some kind of a
Bharat
new
Karnad,
trend.
before I conclude, are you too low-key in terms of your expectations from this meeting, or are you hoping that this will indeed be the paradigm shift that the BJP policy cell, foreign policy cell, and those in the national security architecture would have us believe that this is the first step in the direction of reworking the India-China framework?
Yeah, I do think that there's going to be a reworking of the basic nuts and bolts of the kind of schemes that the government of India has in mind to realize with China. And I think this will involve, as I said earlier, a more forthright definition of the Indian national interests that are involved, whether in the maritime zone or in the land front and so on and so forth. So, you're going to have these differences aired, and it'll be done for the first time in this very straightforward way. Because I think that's very different, that you have to be candid with the other person to say that, things cannot continue if only one side is amenable to a moderation and the other side keeps up with its more belligerent stance.
Okay, we've seen Prime Minister Modi be belligerent and forthright with Pakistan. Whether or not he's prepared to do the same with China remains to be seen. But India and China cannot really walk on the path to trade and investment without simultaneously trying to meaningfully resolve the border dispute. Everything else is not okay from an India perspective, especially keeping Indian long-term national interest in mind. Alka Acharya, Bharat Karnad, Gaurav Sawant for joining us tonight. Thank you very much. We'll be live 9 a.m. tomorrow. That's when the Chinese president will be going first to Rashtrapati Bhavan, then to Rajghat. A long day of ceremonial meetings and also the crucial big bilateral meeting. We'll focus on that all through the day tomorrow. For the time being, thank you very much for joining us.